Hey guys, what's going on? Excoundrel here. Today we're going to be talking about using multiple carries in TFT. It is something that a lot of high elo players have started to do, and it essentially is a different way of playing the game to stacking an individual carry and trying to make that one unit your sole focus. First of all, thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel. Reference link in the description below. Here is a little mini tier list of carries that I think are suitable in the current meta. Now, obviously, what I'm talking about when I talk about carries like this, in terms of multiple carries, is outside of hyper role compositions. Because obviously, in things like Kha'Zix, your Kha'Zix is going to be a carry. In things like Xayah, your Xayah is going to be a carry. In things like Bomberman, your Ziggs is going to be a carry, right? There are compositions that rely on individual certain carries, but what I'm talking about is the flexible way of playing the game, where you essentially play what is given to you, and you often see people splashing things like Jhin snipers, a random Kayle, or even a random Jinx in certain compositions. So we're going to talk about just using these carries as a whole. In the current meta, I think that Jinx is probably the best 4-cost carry. I think she's super strong, she's quite flexible with items, she only needs one other blaster to work, and Misfortune is another blaster that you can bring in who is excellent. So I think that Jinx is one of the best carries, and despite the nerfs, I think that Kayle is also a really good individual splash carry with certain items. I then think Jhin is incredible because you can put snipers in a lot of compositions, and then it comes down to the legendary carries. Xerath 2-star, GP 2-star, and MF 2-star are all great, but the reason they are less or lower in the tier list than Jinx and Kayle is because you need to 2-star them. At 1-star they are not as good, and it's much easier to 2-star a 4-cost than it is to 2-star a 5-cost, and that's why Jinx, Jhin, and Kayle are all valued slightly higher. Vel'Koz is a good carry, but mainly inside Sorcerers and Void. He's not exactly like a flexible carry that you can put in multiple different compositions, and I don't think Irelia is that good as a carry, but she's a good secondary carry. So when we talk about having multiple carries, sometimes Irelia comes in as a good secondary carry. She can be good as a primary carry in certain instances, but I just don't think she's as strong as she used to be. So what do I mean when I talk about multiple carries? Well, essentially, it's a slightly different way of playing the game and a slightly different way of approaching the game, in the sense that it's quite difficult right now to rely on one individual carry, because if that one carry either gets CC'd or gets blown up instantly, like, you don't have any damage left in your team. So what I want to focus on in this video is a game where I essentially played a multiple carry game. Like, I found a Kayle at the Krugs round, okay? So I'm keeping Kayle on my bench because I know that Kayle is a good carry. I slammed a Hand of Justice really early on in my Lucian to be able to sort of maintain my HP. Wasn't able to win streak because I got beaten by the guy who's currently up. But I think it's important that one of the lessons that I have learned recently is that I've often been very focused on economy and hitting certain economy thresholds. So much so that I would often sell units that I probably shouldn't have sold to get to that position. So I have now been much more sort of, I guess, willing to keep big 4-cost units on my bench, even if they're costing me economy to a certain extent, like this Kayle, just to allow me the option later on. Like, if you have, the way I think about it now is if I have one Kayle or one Jinx or one Jhin on my bench, I only need 2 more, so I'm 1/3 of the way there to getting a pretty powerful late game carry on my board. So I'm actually holding a lot of units and sacrificing my economy ever so slightly, essentially just to make sure that I'm able to have the options as we go into the game. That's why I'm holding things like the Xayah and the Shen, because I know that they're going to be relevant if I wanted to go down a Kayle carry route with this particular game. But obviously, here comes the question, where's my multiple carry going to come from? Well, there are certain compositions that allow you to splash flexible carries. Like, Kayle can go into a composition as long as you have Blade Masters and Chrono. And Blade Masters and Chronos can come in many forms, one of which you're seeing right here. Shen is a universally useful unit in a lot of compositions, and Irelia is a universally useful unit in a lot of compositions. So, in this instance, I've now got a very powerful 4-cost Blade Master that can go with the Kayle, and I can actually stack the Irelia if I really wanted to. The more 4-costs often that you have in your composition, the better, realistically, especially if you're not going for a hyper role composition. The other thing that I've got on my bench is a Jhin, because the snipers as a whole, like, Ashe is a really useful sniper, and Jhin does a lot of damage. Even with very little items, Jhin can do quite a lot of damage in compositions. So it's worth considering Jhin as a potential splash, and especially, off the back of this carousel, I get a Jhin with a cloak, which either is going to allow me to build a Hurricane or allow me to build a QSS, which is incredible because that's like a perfect item for him. So now I've got 2 Jhins on my bench. Now I'm searching for one extra Jhin. we're in a situation where you know, we're in a really strong spot. So here's another thing that, you know, I want you to consider. I've actually potentially got 3 carries, you know, building up in this composition with the Irelia and the Jhin, but also worth considering leveling up. You know, something that you just saw me do there was level up. What I would say is that when you level up, you should always have a goal in mind about what you're attempting to do when you make a level happen. So when you actually put gold into that level button, always have a goal in mind what you're going to do at the next level. Usually, that next level should allow you to access a new carry of some sort. You know, so you should be able to add something of value into your composition when you get to that next level. If you can't, then consider not leveling up. I would say that one of the most important skills in TFT is knowing when you shouldn't be leveling, and when you shouldn't be rolling. And with this particular composition, like, you know, I could add the Jhin. Like, Jhin was a good add for me at that stage of the game. But notice how long I've kept this Kayle on the bench. I've kept her sitting on my bench for a significant period of time right now, because I know that she's going to come in useful at some point. I know that she's going to be a massive power upgrade for this composition at some point as well. And scouting around, I can see that no one else is playing Kayle. There are a couple of people playing Jhin, but no one else is actually playing Kayle. And with the items that I've got, it makes sense for me to think about Kayle as a potential option. You're going to notice that I don't actually end up getting particularly good Kayle items in this circumstance. I don't actually end up finding really insane Kayle items, because I just don't, you know, I don't actually find the for the right units to make it happen. So I don't end up finding really strong Kayle items, because you know, the game just didn't offer them to me. But what that, you know, that's one of the things that makes multiple carries so strong, is that it allows you to work with kind of subpar items. You know, if I was playing a pure Kayle game, I ended up with the items that I've got right now, I'm in a rubbish situation, because I've got Hand of Justice plus a load of random BF swords and rods, but no bows whatsoever. I've hit 0 natural bows, and because there is a Kha'Zix hyper role player in my lobby, I'm also not getting the bows because he took them on the carousels. So it's just, you know, it's worth noting that having multiple carries can really actually enhance how you deal with items as well. So just think about it in that respect. You know, yeah, okay, these items might not perfectly suit Kayle, but what these items are allowing me to do is potentially have Irelia as a secondary carry, potentially have Jhin as a secondary carry. And that is one of the things that you need to be aware of. You know, there are ways to kind of put carries in compositions like this, and you can see here I've now maneuvered over to Kayle. I've got Kayle, Jhin, Irelia. I wouldn't really count Wukong as a carry, but you know, you're seeing that the composition strength has gone up a considerable amount here. You know, okay, we're losing to people who have spiked pretty hard, but you know, we're not losing by a lot of HP. And what's worth noting in the mid game is one of the most important things for you to be able to do is preserve HP. Now, again, this is another terrible carousel. You know, there's loads of rods. I really don't need any more rods. There are very few compositions that use multiple rods well, other than playing Gangplank or you know, like a Candyland composition, or Sorcerers, or E-Girls or something. So, you know, at this stage, I'm not in a situation where multiple rods are actually going to be that helpful for me. But you're seeing that I'm sticking with it. Like, even just having the 2-cost carries is a big deal. And actually, I'm just rolling around looking for the Kayle 2. So now I've got the Kayle 2. This is actually a good time to move over some of those items, specifically the Hand of Justice as well. Moving over the Hand of Justice to my Kayle 2 would actually be really powerful at this point in time. But just look how strong I am. And, you know, I'm beating a player with lots of 3 stars, and I don't actually have any good items on my carries. This is just the power of having multiple carries on offer to you, you know, as a team. So now I decide to move over some items over to Kayle. Now I'm one win away from the next neutral round, and this neutral round will allow me to commit certain items to my composition. But you know, there's no need for me to commit all my items right now, because I have one round to wait until I can just sort of make some final decisions about what I'm looking to do with my items. You know, I'm not going to win versus this guy. This guy's just really strong. He's hyper rolled incredibly well. He's got the ability to isolate my backline. It's going to be difficult for me to win against that kind of player. But I'm at 75 HP because I mostly invested in just having strong units on the board. You know, without the right items, but yeah, you know, admittedly, but I did just mostly invest in having strong units on the board, which is what's helped out here. So this is the last neutral round where you're going to get individual item components for the most part, and I do end up finding a bow finally. So bow is obviously going to be used immediately on Kayle, but I'm actually going to add a death blade to my Jhin. So this is the point. I now have 2 carries that I'm committing items to, and I'm actually going to put a Morello's on my Kayle as well. And now I'm going to level up and roll down a little bit. You know, I'm going to roll down a little bit aggressively here. I put the the Ash on, and it randomly I didn't quite get the final add to this composition correctly, but you can just see, you know, how much stronger we've got just by having these multiple carries on the board. It just allows you to be more flexible with where your damage is coming from. If all of my damage was coming from Kayle in this composition, I'd be in a really crap spot because I don't have great items for Kayle. I've got no defensive items on her. So as soon as she dies, that's it. I don't have anything left really in the tank apart from maybe a 0 item Aurelia who could help me out from time to time. But, you know, although we're sort of not in the strongest position, you know, that this guy with the Gangplank, he spikes at this point in time, we still have 30 economy, and I still think that we beat, you know, a considerable number of people in the lobby. So having multiple carries, you're going to see, is going to start to become more and more impactful as we go along, and especially as we start to sort of get extra items to throw on board as well, because this is the point in the game where I just want to survive until the Carousel, until Kayn. If I can survive until the Carousel and until Kayn, then we're in a situation where you know, I can add an extra item to Jhin, I can add an extra item to my Wukong. Just, you know, we're just in a good spot all round. And you can see here, even versus a Gangplank player, and he's level 9, we demolished him. Like, we really demolished him because we had that multiple carry threat. And also it allows you to be flexible with your positioning. What I would note is that I have Jhin on the opposite side of the board to my Kayle, because if my Kayle dies, then at least I have my Jhin, who's probably going to be protected for a bit longer. If my Jhin dies and gets dived on, at least my Kayle is then going to be still able to continue her damage output. So it's just worth noting about the positioning of my Kayle and sort of the items that I've got, and as well as the items where the items are spread around this particular board. You know, Jhin is on one side, Kayle is on the other. And I've got this set up so that Ashe is not getting hooked, by the way. The reason I don't want Ashe getting hooked is because, you know, I'd like her ultimate is actually much more useful than you would think. And this is versus the guy who was like 100% for the entire game. You know, he's in a really strong spot. He's level 9 with 50 gold. He's probably going to win this lobby just because, well, spoiler alert, he does win this lobby just because he's got so much gold to work with. Like, this guy can essentially now slow roll for whatever he wants for the rest of the game. Fizz 3, Vel'Koz 3, Cho'Gath 3. So my aim is probably not going to be for top 1 this game. I'd have to get very lucky, and he would have to get very unlucky to do so. Broke my own rule here. I actually moved Jhin over randomly. I think it's because I thought I was playing someone else. I essentially had a 50-50 to choose from, and I thought that maybe moving to this side of the board was going to be better for both my carries. But, you know, irrespective of that, you know, I still go into the Kayn round with 48 HP alive, and I'm still in a situation where I'm probably top 4ing, very likely going to be sort of aiming for a top 3 situation in this scenario as well. So everything's looking pretty good, just at this stage of the game. What I will be aiming to do now is either go to level 9 or try and roll aggressively for a 3-star Kayle or a 3-star Wukong. Because I'm 3 Wukongs away, and I found a Thresh as well, which is really important. Like, Thresh coming on, I can put him on for the Wukong, and especially if I find like a 3-star Wukong in this scenario, we're in a super strong spot. I'm actually buying and selling Karmas because there was a thought in my mind that maybe I'd go down a Mystic route. But if I can find a 3-star Wukong, like, that is going to massively impact me. But that's, you know, I've had the economy to do so because I've been working on multiple carries, like, and that's been preserving HP for me. I've just been able to survive the mid game quite heavily because, again, I've just been focusing on having multiple carries in sort of in the options. Now, I did buy the MF here, but I just don't think the MF is a particularly viable addition to my build right now. I do find the Wukong 3, by the way. So the Wukong 3 does get added, so I have him available. And so now this is like, we're in a strong spot. Unfortunately, my Kayle gets CC'd here, which is just a massive error on my part. Like, Kayle should have been on the other side of the board to the Shredder. That's one of the problems that I have, is that I sometimes focus a little bit too much on rolling and less on kind of on where I should be positioned for particular compositions. So now what I'm doing is just trying to sort of spread my compositions out, and I'm trying to put Kayle on the other side to Jhin once more, because again, I know I wanted my Jhin to either be the focus immediately or my Kayle to be the focus immediately. The unfortunate thing that happened here was that my Kayle got CC'd. Sometimes sometimes the Cho'Gath is just going to focus you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Like, my Kayle doesn't have a defensive item. If she had a Trap Claw, she might have been able to survive that a bit longer, but irrespective, you know, we're top 5 at this point in time. So we're one loss away from top 4, but I am pretty confident that as long as I position correctly, this is a game where I could definitely get a top 3 at least. And I'm just keeping these units on my bench because, again, pulling a Kayle 2 in and pulling a Soraka 2 in is actually really strong for me overall. So you can see here that I give the Seraphs over to the Thresh. The reason I do that is because it allows him to get an immediate pull. So he's going to pull someone off the bench immediately. And you can see, again, I specifically position my Jhin and my Kayle away from this comp because it keeps them out of range of A, the Kha'Zix, and B, the Vel'Koz. But you can see this guy has got one Vel'Koz away from getting Vel'Koz 3, and he's very close to a Cho'Gath 3 as well. So it's probably unlikely that I'm beating that chap. So my main focus now needs to be positioning and dealing with the other 2 players in this lobby who are very strong. I'm actually grouping my Kayle up with my oh no, I'm not. I'm actually not grouping my Kayle up. Again, splitting my Kayle up from my Jhin, just to allow my Kayle and my Jhin to be on 2 different sides of the board, which, you know, is going to allow my Jhin and my Kayle to be less targetable by the enemy. And in this circumstance, we end up getting into the top 3 because we beat the other Jhin player pretty convincingly. And now we have 2 Kha'Zix and, well, rather 2 Void players to deal with. Void Brawler, Kha'Zix Hyperall, they're all over the place right now. I'm sure you guys know about it. They're just it's an incredibly strong build in general. But I do find a Frozen Heart, which is actually quite useful, especially when you've got a 3-star Wukong, and also, you know, when you're in a situation where you need to slow down the attack speed of a double Zeke's player. So what I find here is I'm just either trying to look for Kayle 3 or try and look for a Thresh 2. Like a Thresh 2 would be a pretty nice upgrade for me, I think, overall, and that's why I end up selling the Kayle in this circumstance. The other reason I end up selling the Kayle in this circumstance is because I'm pretty keen to have good pulls from my Thresh, so things like the Lulu and things like the Soraka are good pulls, and so having a Kayle 2 is actually slightly less impactful pull than having one of the 2 Lulus or the Soraka coming through. And finding a Thresh 2 in this circumstance is really good as well. Now this guy's got a Vel'Koz 3 and a Cho'Gath 3. There's no way I'm beating him, but you know, just by having multiple carries in a composition that doesn't really look particularly normal, we end up coming second, which is a really, really good result for us in this game. And that's just the idea of having multiple carries. It's a really good way to play the game.